Hi, and welcome to a new episode of Amplify's podcast, the podcast dedicated to pharma and medtech leaders, the podcast that helps you and your team maximize your potential. Good day to you, Danielle Bateman. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks, Guillaume. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to have you.
I was in Navy for 11 years. Really enjoyed that. And that what I would say would be customer. I then left the Navy and worked in tech. And so became on the vendor side. And then I moved from vendor to pharma.
Yep.
And became more of a customer side. So I think I've had the opportunity probably differently to a lot of pharma. I didn't join pharma as a nurse or a doctor or a pharmacist. I joined as a tech and had to learn incredibly how different pharma is to any other industry that I had the opportunity beforehand. So in terms of that, I think when I was a vendor, what I really wanted to do was to make sure we had shared outcomes and be able to work together and closely. And I think and obviously learn from the customer on what we can do. I think a true partnership where both parties can align on what is going to get the best outcome for everybody is super important. One of the things I learned very early on is if we think about a triangle, we have cost, we have quality, and we have timelines. And generally, if everyone's working towards those three, you get a really successful outcome. However, it's really challenging to get all three. Generally, if you want low cost and fast timelines, maybe quality not so great.
You talked about the importance of having some sort of win-win, but as customers, we are often guilty of keeping our partners partially in the dark.
If it's a brand new vendor, I think it's really tough to build a trusting relationship and share.
Right.
And I think one of the things, as you know, from medtech and pharma, compliance and regulatory requirements are significantly different maybe than other industries as well. And so what obviously we have RFP situations which take a long time, but I believe are necessary as well. What I would like to do is once you can work with a vendor and you really do have a shared partnership and you develop a level of trust, is then to be able to have a preferred vendor status. And once you have a preferred vendor status, I think it's pretty clear that you can then start to build on what you're talking about, which is let's have a discussion on some win-win partnerships. But first RFP, I think, is really challenging for that.
Right. And navigating that complexity of not having one buyer anymore, but a committee and different stakeholders and so on. I see you smiling. How do you see this from the customer side of you? And is it realistic to please everybody with one provider?
I think it's really tough for one solution fits all. I've been in Asia now for 23 years, and so I would say I'm pretty much aware of emerging markets. And the value of a solution from an emerging markets perspective is incredibly different if you compare that to Europe and the US. And the cost of solutions, I would say I have a very emerging markets view on how much solutions can cost. And it's really challenging because the cost of healthcare is incredibly different in the markets as well. And so we can't expect one, and a lot of the other vendors also take this into account in terms of emerging markets prices in software. Not all markets do that.
Right.
Not all companies do that. But I do think we need to make sure that when we're talking to customers in Vietnam, that we have something that is relevant for them in Vietnam and is cost effective if we take into our Vietnam team. Because if we're sitting in Europe and we're having a very expensive software in Vietnam, you're going to say, well, actually, we have a solution that could be just as good here.
Right. And that's an interesting point, because you are alluding to a point that is critical in large pharma organizations or in large enterprises as a whole, is that logic that I would call this global governance or global and local governance. So how do you have, from a tech perspective, one strategy, one vision, one MarTech ecosystem, for example, and at the same time be able to provide a certain level of empowerment to the markets?
Actually, it's really challenging, and every situation is slightly different.
Mm-hmm.
I would say we do have global pricing, and we do have to. There is a cost of doing business, and when we talk about compliance and regulatory, and if you think about all of the solutions that we have, data privacy is really a very large topic. GDPR is also huge. So I think when you look at the global providers of software, there is that level of trust that you're going to be able to be compliant in many of the organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And if a data breach happens in Vietnam because we've had a local vendor hasn't been aware of certain criteria, that impacts everything. And third parties come into this as well, as you probably know from living in Singapore. DBS had an issue with one of their third-party printers. So it's just a printer supplier got hacked, and that impacted DBS Bank. So I think we have to be really, really careful when it comes to third parties, making sure that any particular third party we have meets the most stringent standards. And that's where, coming back into RFPs, coming back into level of trust, and working with vendors that are aware of that is incredibly important.
Yeah. We see in the CRM and the cloud-based business a lot of movement recently. What are your views on that, and what is the opportunity for both pharma and for these new providers coming into the space of CRM for pharma?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think most of the life sciences, I would say Veeva had a full, a lot of market share. And then on other activities, Salesforce also had market share. And then obviously Veeva made the decision to exit from Salesforce as their platform. And now all of the pharma companies that are on Veeva have to make a decision and end by 2030. And I think I can say this honestly, I think either decision, whether you continue with the Veeva platform or if you move to Salesforce as a new platform, there are going to be significant changes that need to make place on both sides. And so it'll be a case of the company. And this where it's not a tech decision, it's a business decision. And it makes sure that the business teams are aware in a hopefully a simplified, clear way what will be the best outcomes for the company on where they want to go. Because that strategic view of a company will be very significant in how you do it. We talked about ecosystems before. Both solutions offer very different ecosystems, very different partners, and potentially a very different way to approach the same problems that we're having.
Right. If you look at it as a whole, do you think that the trend is more towards centralization and more power given to the global decision makers and global HQ in terms of that governance, managing providers, and so on? Or do you feel that the pharma sector as a whole is more going towards the exact opposite direction, which is more empowerment to the local markets? Any thoughts on that?
From my experience, definitely towards global. I think there's a lot of pharma multinationals that are under significant cost pressures.
Right.
And so if you can have global, then you're creating once and then you're able to localize. So I do feel global platforms will be the continuation. Now, in the previous company I worked for, the local countries were given the empowerment to make a choice. But obviously we encouraged and influenced as much as we could to make sure that they were aware of all of the issues that they would have. When it comes to audit, if you use global systems, the global teams are responsible for audit and for compliance and for all of these relationships.
Mm-hmm.
If you have local systems, it's the local teams. And obviously headcount, especially from a tech perspective locally,
Mm-hmm.
is pretty short as well. The biggest challenges and probably the lessons learned over the years has been change management.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to put together a solution that people will adopt and use, because we're all creatures of habits. We like to sit in the same seats. We like to do something similar. We go to the same restaurants. And so in order to change ourselves, we need to feel that we're going to get some value out of it. And I think when it comes to working with vendors, we need to appreciate that every solution that as a tech person we might think is really cool, ultimately the end users are the ones that need to adopt it.
Of course.
And so working with vendors who appreciate that is one of those aspects that maybe not everyone really understands.
Mm-hmm.
You can really, that the pitch might be really good, but the adoption might be poor, and then everybody loses.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other topics that we had talked about was a bold change. And when I was thinking about bold changes and is there an idea that is bold, I probably wouldn't use the word bold. But if we take pharma, and one of the things that I feel very passionately about in pharma is making sure that the medicines that will really benefit patients gets to the patients. And so there's a term called value-based contracting.
Mm-hmm.
And value-based contracting really is where pharmaceutical companies and government payers all get together and they make a contract that says if we have this medicine, we expect this outcome on this patient, and therefore we get incentivized based on the outcomes. Now, the US government's trying to do that as well. We'll see how that works with all of the changes recently.
Right.
But I would like to do something like that with vendor arrangements.
Very interesting.
So if you think about it, share of voice is incredibly important when it comes to medicines, because in majority of the markets, exception of US, of course, and also New Zealand, surprisingly enough, we can't do direct to consumer when we're in pharma.
Sure.
So we rely on the doctors understanding the value of the medicines that we provide, and then being able to make sure that their patients are aware and hopefully prescribe that information, our products to the patients, and then hopefully improve patient outcomes. So if we think about share of voice and working with vendors, how do we do share of voice in a way that is meaningful and actually achieves that? So if the vendor was to say, hey, I think if we do these types of activities, we can increase your share of voice by this amount, and then that will impact prescribing behavior, I think you could then come to an agreement with that. And that would be something I think would be really interesting. And we, now that we have AI and we have tech, we can probably do a lot more around that to actually really be able to make that fulfilling.
Correct.
If we think about from a patient perspective, real-world evidence, capturing real-world evidence that helps the value-based contracting is something that's very doable now with wearables and those.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think for a lot of our audience who are maybe sitting on the partner side, I think you are giving them some good nuggets of advice here if they want to come with a new approach to their commercial offer and really make sure that they provide the value expected by the pharma client. I really like this approach. That makes a lot of sense.
one thing I have learnt in my time, I was fortunate enough to roll out CRM very early on in my career. Salesforce at the time, back in 2009. And I think I'd worked really closely with the sales reps, with the marketing team, with the business operations team, and really tried to bring it all together and all the ideas. And we rolled out the solution, and the adoption wasn't as what we had predicted, even with all the training. And so then I tried to think a little bit about how do I make a difference. And what happened is it was actually Vietnam. It happened that the sales rep who happened to be the highest performer for a month also happened to be my top Salesforce user as well. And so I took the opportunity to meet with him. Obviously, it was a bit challenging at the time, but we spoke quite well. And I asked him what he did, what made the difference, why did he think that he was using Salesforce, and he had a whole story and was very meticulous. You'll always get your top performers adopting as a simple thing. And so then I said to him, now could you talk to the other sales reps about the same thing we just mentioned? And he did. Luckily, his manager let him. And the adoption in Vietnam went through the roof. So I then went to all of the other countries that I had rolled out and did the same process. And so I could have shared exactly what he said, but I wouldn't have made a difference. The difference is somebody in their shoes who was performing well, who was offering their tips because they had done that before. And I think when it comes to change management, you need to identify early adopters of the particular area of responsibility that you're wanting to change, and then work with them and have them be the voice and be very open and honest that it's their story and you sit in the back and you just watch.
This is fantastic. Yeah, this is a great story, and this is a good reminder that identifying this champion instead of trying to change everybody's mindset in one go is finding that one or few early adopters, as you said, that will then tell that story for you and by themselves is really a great example. Thank you so much for sharing. I think this is of great value because a lot of our guests, a lot of our followers are going through and navigating that same journey and trying to find ways to move the needle. And so this is pure wisdom and experience speaking right here. Thank you.
And luck.
Yeah, but this is part of the journey as well, right? Having the curiosity and the honesty to recognize that everything is a learning opportunity for us is important. Yeah.
Thanks, Guillaume. I've had a lovely time. Time's actually flown really quickly, so it's a good thing. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And thank you very much to all of you for watching this Amplifies podcast. You can subscribe to the channel, of course, put your comments, share. We'll see you on the next episode soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.